Okay, you don't get to see my lovely face this morning because it's early morning and it's not ready to be seen by the public yet. So, continuing on, we're going to talk about Section 2 today. I'm not going to do a lecture over Section 3. You can view that on your own. So, continuing on with our core themes of biology. Evolution accounts for the unity and diversity of life. Remember that the environment is what's responsible for driving evolution. So as the environment changes, species have to adapt to survive within that context. So without changing environments, there's not necessarily going to be evolution. Now, granted, evolution does arise from random mutations within the DNA, and this again also accounts for the diversity of life. There are three domains of life, and it used to be that there were just 6 kingdoms. But as science has progressed, we've realized that those kingdoms are not sufficient enough to classify all living organisms. We need to go a level higher. We need to go and have domains. So if you remember back to very basic biology, you have your taxonomic divisions. You go kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And remember, you always started with kingdom. Kingdom is not the highest any longer. It's now domain. And we have 3 domains. So the reason we need domains is because, like I said, science has progressed. We can look at DNA now and we can see how different organisms actually are, and kingdoms were not sufficient as the top way to classify organisms. So there are 3 domains. They are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. You belong to eukarya. Domains bacteria and archaea are prokaryotes. Remember, prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. These are the only living prokaryotes. Everything else falls into eukarya. Eukarya are eukaryotic cells. They have a nucleus, and this is what you belong to. So, domain eukarya is also incredibly diverse. It has 3 multicellular kingdoms, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia. Plants are photosynthetic, so they get their energy from the sunlight. Fungi absorb nutrients from the soil. They can be decomposers. They can be parasites. They are very, very well adept at overcoming adverse conditions. And animals, such as you ingest your food. You do not absorb it from your surrounding environment because that would be incredibly gross. I can tell you stories about starfish, but I will save that for another day. So if we look up here in our top left, domain bacteria, notice we have these raw, Cheeto corn poof looking structures here. Notice their size. They're only about 2 micrometers in size. These are not visible to the naked eye. And we have domain archaea. Again, incredibly small. You can't see these, but they are there. They're covering your entire body. Mainly the bacteria, not archaea. Archaea are what we found in really incredibly extreme environments, like near the geysers or deep in the bottom of the ocean. Bacteria are the ones that are everywhere. And these are the most these 2 domains are the most primitive, the oldest, and there's a reason for that. They can change, they can mutate like crazy, and they're really good at evolving, so that's why they're still around. Then we move down to domain eukarya. We have our plants, our fungi, animals, and protists. Protists are typically single-celled, hence why they were not lumped in the multicellular category. All of the rest are multicellular, meaning they're made of more than one cell. The protists are single-celled. And if you remember way back when, and you may not, domain bacteria and domain archaea used to actually be known as kingdom Monera, but that no longer exists. Here's bacteria, archaea, and domain eukarya, which is broken down into 4 kingdoms, Plantae, Fungi, Animalia, and Protista. Domain eukarya, kingdom Plantae, obviously those are going to all be photosynthetic. These are going to be your plants. Domain eukarya, kingdom fungi, these are going to be, like I said, your decomposers, your morel mushrooms, the shiitake mushrooms. All of these things are fungi. And this structure that you actually see sprouting up above the ground, that's the fruiting body. There is this whole root system that you don't see underneath the ground that is actually the main body of the organism. Domain eukarya, kingdom Animalia, you're quite familiar with that one. Domain eukarya, Protista. Again, these are very, very small, almost invisible to the naked eye. We have here an amoeba, probably a euglena here. These are typically found in pond water. If you get yourself a sample of pond water and look at it under a microscope, you can see many of these little critters floating around. DNA is the universal genetic language common to all organisms. We've already kind of talked about this. Everything that's living has DNA. And remember, the more DNA sequence that they share in common, the more closely two species are related. We also use fossils to document evolution, because there are some species that used to exist that aren't here anymore, and we only know that because of fossils. Such as this big feller here, some sort of dinosaur. We know dinosaurs existed, but our only living modern day dinosaur are the crocodile, which is quite an understatement compared to what they used to be. So Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, wrote this very famous book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. Charles Darwin is the one who came up with some themes. The first one being descent with modification. Okay, so that means that over time, organisms would branch off from common ancestors and they would change. He also came up with the theory of natural selection. So that means the organism that is best suited for the environment will survive. If you are a giraffe, for instance, and all of the food is up really high, you're going to do very well. However, if you're a mole and all the food is still up really high, that mole is going to have a hard time surviving in that environment. And he noticed this with his finches. This is a very famous experiment. His finches, he went to an island and he noticed that they were all the same. They weren't the same species, but they were all finches. And he noticed they had different beak sizes. So he observed them and he noticed that they ate different types of seeds based on their beak size. So depending on your beak, one beak was more adept at eating a certain type of seed versus another beak. Here is a lovely video of a soaring hawk. You can watch that later. Same with an albatross courtship. There's Charles Darwin. Here are some birds. Notice that they have they're all birds, but they are all differently adapted to different environments. This is that descent with modification. Your penguin is well adapted to live in the very cold temperatures. Flamingos can stand in water and get their food. They get that pink color because I believe they eat some species of shrimp or krill or something to that effect. And then we have our little tiny finch in the top. We already talked about this. You can look over that on your own time. So here's natural selection. We have light gray beetles, dark gray beetles. Okay? Natural selection. These birds prefer to eat the light gray beetles, so they don't survive. And over time, all we have left in the population are the dark gray beetles. You can see them all here, all these dark gray ones, because this bird has eaten all of these light gray ones. Another common theme here is that certain structures come from common ancestors. So for instance, I'm just going to read this one to you here. The forelimb of a human, the foreleg of a horse, the flipper of a whale, and wing of a bat all share common skeletal architecture. So if you were to dissect those things and look at them, you would see that they're very, very common, very similar in their architecture. And that's because they all came from a common ancestor that split off at different times, and so you have descent with modification from Darwin. That's what makes them look different by today's standard, but they do share similar architecture. The diversity of mammalian limbs results from the modification by natural selection over millions of years. Again, you can read this. This is what we call a cladogram. So all of these things on the right here, all these different species, are modern day species. You can see, think of it like a family tree, where they branch off together. That point where they branch is their common ancestor. And this would be the common ancestor for all 4 of these species. This would be the common ancestor for all 5 of these species. dating back to the most common ancestor for all of the modern day species of finches. Again, I'm not going to do a podcast on section 1.3. You can read that on your own, and we'll be talking to you soon.